Hi, this is Julie Cohen, and you are watching Work Life Leader Live. So thank you for tuning in or joining me wherever you are, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. I'm thrilled you're here. And today's topic of Work Life Leader Live Leadership Chat is diversity, equity, and inclusion, a leader's journey. And I'm going to introduce my guest in a minute or so. But before I get started, I just want to thank you for joining us. Today is a conversation, and wherever you're watching, please put comments as we go. Your input is going to be really important. I want to tell you a little bit about Work Life Leader Live and other things we're doing besides leadership chats, where I'm talking to smart people about leadership, career development, career management, talent development, the intersection of work and life. I also am doing what's called Work Life Leader Live Book Group. We're going to be discussing books that fit in this category. And our next book, our first book actually, is going to be No Rules, Netflix and the Culture of Reinvention. And I'll be posting the details about that later today. And also we're going to be hopefully debuting shortly Work Life Leader Live Coaching, where I'm going to be coaching someone real time so people can understand the power of coaching and how it develops leaders. So please stay tuned for announcements, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. There'll be more details. So with that, it's my pleasure to bring on my colleague, Nancy Harris. Hi, Nancy.
Hello, Julie. Hello, everyone.
Hey, well, it's great you're here. And I want to do the formal introduction before we dive into, this really important topic. So Nancy is founder and CEO of Restart Consulting. Restart helps organizations develop inclusive cultures and leaders. Her approach to change focuses on embedding diversity into every fiber of an organization and coaching leaders to serve as catalysts for change. Nancy considers herself a people geek. I think I'm a people geek too. I never considered it, but I like that. And is fascinated by how people respond to change. She is the host of her own podcast, which is The Intersection. So I encourage you to find that and listen to that. And we'll definitely have more information on where you can find that later and in comments after we're done. And she's also a coach and facilitator at Northwestern's College Executive Education. And I'm honored that she's also an executive coach with Work Life Leader. Also, she's a fellow dog lover. Her dog is Tito, and Tito and my Wolfie are cosmic buddies. They've never met because Nancy's in Chicago. But Well, so welcome, Nancy. Yeah. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you. So Tito may have some commentary during the course of this as well. So
yes.
Barking or some noises in the background, but that's okay. We're live.
He is welcome. So let's talk about, I want to introduce today's topic and begin our discussion. So I think today's topic is timely, and yet it is timeless. Creating a work environment where every person is fully respected and has the tools that they need to be successful is critical to leadership and organizational success. As a white woman, I know I need to do more and to do better in both understanding and acting to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this topic obviously has been in the HR world, and Nancy's roots are in human resources, and I'm sure she'll talk more about that. This has been, I don't know, tell me what you think, Nancy. This has been kind of on the buzzword in HR circles for the past, I don't know, couple years, 3-5 years. Where it's really come to, it's been around for a long time, but where it's taken What do you think? I mean, how long has it been?
I mean, honestly, I started my career 20 some odd years ago. And I remember one of the first things I did at the company that I worked with, they were rolling out like diversity training. I mean, I'm sure it looks quite different. As a matter of fact, I know it looks quite different, 20 years ago than it does now. But I think it's been, a topic for many years. I just think it's grown and it's evolved and it's shifted as organizations have grown and evolved and shifted,
Right.
and leaders have grown and evolved and shifted. And so I think the focus 20 years ago, and sometimes it is now, very much on training, very much on like EEOC and numbers and, legal requirements, again, particularly in the US. I know if there's people, in other parts of the world listening, different perspective, but from a US perspective, that's really kind of where the roots started.
Right.
And then it's just grown and evolved over the years.
Yeah. And just for the people who are listening, EEOC is, again, it's a U.S. legal, it's an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, in case you're not familiar with that acronym or not in the U.S. So before we start going deeper, first off, I want to welcome people who are watching live. So this is we're Friday. I got to look at my calendar. Friday, September 25th, a little after noon Eastern U.S. time. So if you're here live, please put a comment in the chat box, say who you are, welcome, and put hashtag live so we know you're here watching live. We know a lot of people watch some of these previous broadcasts recorded. We'll be checking comments real time, but also I will be going back and looking at comments and questions afterwards. So we really do want to hear your comments and questions. We love them, and that makes us be able to respond to what is important and what's on your mind as we talk about our topic today, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, a leader's journey. The other thing I want to respond to that Nancy said that I think is really important, you talked about kind of how DEI often in organizations, and this isn't by no means only what they do, but there is a lot around, the legality and training and, helping, kind of address those types of issues, kind of compliance issues. Myself as a coach and also as a learner, as someone who feels, as I said earlier, I have so much to learn. I come from a place as a coach, how do I give my tools to the people I coach to help them navigate both challenges and build their own skills and strengths to create better working conditions for themselves, for their team, for their people who may not feel included and dealing with equity, may not feel that they are, kind of experiencing the same equity as others. So I always look at it from, an individual perspective. What can I do to support those people? And then for me as an individual, I like, what do I need to do to learn more so I can change my behavior? But also, what do I need so I can learn more to help change my own behavior and facilitate other people's behavior? So this topic, we may touch into organizational and some of that compliance stuff because Nancy is an expert on that. I am not. But there's going to be a lot about real-time issues, challenges. And so we want your questions. I want this to be a safe place. You can ask whatever questions you want. And I think, I know when Nancy and I were talking before, she talked about the importance of having safe places. So I think I'm speaking for you also. But just any thoughts and comments on that before we start diving in, Nancy?
No, I agree with you in the sense of I think as a leader, it's got to start with your own self-awareness and your own really understanding where you are on the journey. And I use the phrase a lot, like, this is a journey. It's not a, destination point that you get to on your, KPIs or whatever. That's just not what it is. It's ongoing. But I think as a leader to step back and say, well, where am I? Where do I feel comfortable, or where do I feel uncomfortable? And then really starting with your own self-awareness and your own development. And then that in and of itself, you can start to think about how you want to develop your teams, your organizations, your departments, and again, your companies overall.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're on the same page, and yet we want to hear from you if you're on a different page. So I see we have some guests here live already. I want to say hi to Bill Hyman. Bill Hyman is a colleague, and Bill said, just so you know, and I'm going to post this one because actually I'm going to post all the comments. So Bill Hyman is here, great guest, and I agree. Thank you, Bill. And then I want to say hi to I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it Raman or Rahman? Do you know this person?
I don't. I'm just saying hello.
Again, if I'm not pronouncing your name, Raman, well, please forgive me. And thank you for tuning in live. We're glad you're here. And if you are here, please comment. And we'd love to know that you're here. And we want to hear your questions, comments as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, a leader's journey. And I'm joined by Nancy Harris, who is the CEO and founder of Restart Consulting. So, Nancy, I want to start with I want to share a real situation that a leader expressed. I'm just going to make up this person's name. We'll call him Mark. So Mark is a leader. He's a manager of a team of professionals, and he came to coaching soon after the George Floyd murder. Horrified, upset. He is a white male, and on his team was mostly white, but there was an African American manager on his team, and he knew he wanted to say something and felt he needed to say something both for himself and for the team, and he really struggled, didn't know what to say, because he wasn't concerned about the other white people. He was concerned about the African American man on his team. Would he say the right thing or not right thing? And so that was his struggle. So I know I have thoughts on that, but why don't we kick it off with your thoughts on how to support that person, how to support Mark?
Yeah, I would say one of the first things is for Mark to acknowledge where he's at. I think the other thing that's really important is for Mark to say something and acknowledge not just to the African American person on his team, but his team overall. I mean, one of the things that I've been seeing in this, and I call it a movement, is that this is impacting everybody. Now, again, to the degree it's going to look different, but I think Mark, as a leader, I would encourage him to acknowledge. And I think it's important for him to acknowledge and say he doesn't know all the right answers. He's not perfect. No leader is perfect. None of us are perfect. But I think oftentimes, Julie, what I see, and I don't know if you see this, is that a lot of leaders will say, I don't feel comfortable talking about a particular subject. I don't feel comfortable talking about DEI. Oh, should I really bring this up in the workplace because this isn't work. Let's just focus on our work and move things forward. And you need to stop and pause and say, yeah, this does impact everybody. Work-life leader, as your organization is, right? It's really imperative to just not gloss over things and acknowledge and be vulnerable and say, I don't know all the right things to say. I'm not sure what to say, but here's how I'm feeling. Here's what's happening. I don't know how Mark was feeling, but just even to express that and open that door. We talked about a safe space. Open that door and dialogue. I don't know what to say. It's probably not going to be the perfect thing to say, but my virtual door right now, is open to having that dialogue and that conversation. But I think don't get so caught up in I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing that you just don't say anything and you don't acknowledge it.
Right. And it's interesting to build on what you said. What we're talking about here, is critically important around the topic, and it's also these are good skills for any leader. This is good leadership.
Yes.
So and I think you're 100% I think it's so important to stress what you said about this affects everyone on the team. It doesn't matter what your skin color is and what your experience is. And there needs to be a level of sensitivity and vulnerability to, to the person of color. And I know I struggled with this. I reached out to you, especially after the George Floyd situation. And, to be silent to me felt like, I was not acknowledging, horror, and so, what you're describing, the act of Mark potentially just not knowing and being clear about that is great, because it makes him human, and he's not stepping over something that is critically important to everybody. And so it might be hard. And yeah, so
can I add something?
Yeah, of course.
I also think, this may be a bit controversial, but I think also not knowing is not an excuse either. So I think I go into that part that I think is so important around the awareness and the self-awareness, that if you're also not comfortable, and I think it's absolutely fine to acknowledge that, I also then would challenge Mark to say, what can you do to learn more? How can you make yourself more comfortable? How can you, again, develop your own self and your own skills as well too? I think that's also something that's really important too. So it's not an excuse to be like, I don't know. I'm going to acknowledge it and say, that's it. Okay, now you know that. Let's get some work in.
Yeah. So so therein lies a really good point. So acknowledging is important, and it's not enough.
Right.
So silence is never okay. Because, what does silence do? You're saying it doesn't exist, and we all know it. We all know issues and concerns do. So silence is never okay. Acknowledging is important, but not enough. So let's take this a little deeper. So if we look at a leader's journey around this from a few different perspectives, so you and I kind of talked in advance, about this. So we want to look at from three levels: thinking differently, acting and doing differently, and being differently. And actually, we've already talked about it, these concepts of being differently. And I think I'm not sure which they're all hard. So I don't know which is the hardest, but I was going to start with thinking differently, but we started talking about how people need to be different when the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion are, on the table. The issue is, to me, it's always around, and to pretend it's not is, putting your head in the sand. But around kind of how to approach, like, how do I need to be with this? Like, who do I need to be inside? You talked about vulnerable. You use that word vulnerable, right? Yes. So what is that? Like, what do you think that looks like?
I think in the example that we were talking about, it being vulnerable and saying how you feel. I was working with a client, and they were really upset by what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, right? They were from that city, right? Wow. And he was a white man, and he's like, well, what do I say? You say just that, right? That's the vulnerability. I'm from there. This is really, painful on many different levels for him, right? And you express that. And so that, to me, is a part of being vulnerable, and being a vulnerable leader is really, sharing your feelings on it. And again, that sounds like touchy-feely, it's at work and all that. That's the human part of you. That's what people are connecting to as a leader. And it's, again, I think just really being real, really being as raw as you can be about what it is that you're feeling and where you're at. And then the other piece where you talked about the vulnerability is, I think being vulnerable is saying that you don't know and that you don't have all the answers right now, that's okay. Again, nobody is expecting all of us to have all of the answers about everything all of the time, right? Yeah. So that vulnerability to say, I don't know. I don't know, but I'll find out. I don't know, but I'm going to, dig a little bit deeper and see how I can learn and deepen my own level of learning within this area. I think is also really important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. So the things I think we talk about, so vulnerability, openness, curiosity.
Yes. Curiosity.
And then, I guess curiosity and kind of like a learning approach is really important. And kind of there's a level of self-awareness that you need to understand where your biases are and how they show up. And notice I didn't say if you have biases.
Right. Because we all do.
Right. Where they are and where they show up. So it's interesting. This strikes me. So we're actually, I feel like we're talking about this, and tell me what you think. We're talking about this it feels like we're talking about this from a white perspective. Like, I feel like we're talking about what white people need to do. And I again, I think because I think we came to this, would we do this? And I want to make sure I'm not, like, even in the shaping of this conversation, I want to make sure I'm not, that I don't have biases. Just literally right now, it just struck me that, am I targeting this to the right audience or the wrong audience? Am I putting my own biases, even just by setting this up this way? So I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it goes back to something that you said earlier around a lot of these things are foundational as a good leader. So I think, whether you're white, Black, LGBTQ plus, I think there's a foundational piece here that I think we often don't talk about, and it's that foundation of leadership skills being there. So Julie, I don't necessarily know that, and somebody can call me out on it too. I don't necessarily know that you were looking at it through the lens of, or maybe you were through a lens of a white female, right? I honestly, I think you've got to have that foundation there.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that this isn't like only about helping white people. Like,
Oh, and we can talk about, yes.
I was like, and so, well, you know what, let me pause for a minute and say, what do you think? For those of you who are watching live, it's Friday, September 25th. We're approaching 12:30 Eastern. If you're watching recorded, I'd love to know what you think too. Because, again, I'm just was getting like kind of this emotional thing, like, am I not being as open as I should be here? So I'm curious if you have questions, comments. And I see just another chat. I wanted to thank Sharon Levenger, just said, you are so right. Silence isn't okay. So being silent is never okay, which we talked about. And so please, if you're here live, post comments. If you're if there's a situation that you've struggled with, whether you're a white professional, a professional of color, an LGBTQ professional, or any professional, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And please ask us questions from a perspective of leadership, from a perspective of DEI. Nancy, I know you want to say something. I just wanted to reintroduce us.
Yeah, I think you were coming at it from a leadership lens, right? So that's the lens in which that you were coming, not necessarily let's say I'm an African-American woman on this team, how might I respond? I think there's something really important, again, since we are talking about this from, let's say, a leadership standpoint, and you're managing a team from that lens, is, how well do you know your team, right? I think that's something that's really, really important. I can't remember who I was following on Twitter or social media, but it was, she made a comment right after the Breonna Taylor decision, or
Yeah.
that happened with the police officers. And so she said, don't talk to me today. She's an African American woman. She's like, don't talk to me today. Like, just don't ask me any questions, right? Like, so I think, when she said that, I thought, oh, okay. She may say that. I may say, I want you to say something. I want you to check in and see how I'm doing, right? So I think as a leader, you manage your team. How well do you know the people on your team, right? When do they need space? When don't they need space? I think is something also that's really important. So
yeah, right. And so again, that's good leadership, is being able to talk to each of your team members individually. Hey, how are you? What do you need from me now?
right,
And it might be get out of my face, or
right,
it might be, you know what? Can you check in with me, or could you talk to the team, or could you do this, or I need a day off? Who knows? And so, but what's interesting, kind of building on the leadership of what you said, is that doesn't happen only when this horrible. Oops, I was going to curse. When this horrible stuff is happening in our country, that needs to happen all the time. So it's not like, okay, we pay attention to DEI when there's a horror and there's like a blatant injustice. Through my work and kind of the personal work, my personal DEI journey that started. Actually, I'll be honest, when mine started. I was kind of clueless. I just had my little life and things were fine. But when Trayvon Martin was murdered, that's when my journey started, and it hit me personally. I think I was aware, but until I was like, that happened, it was like, I can't just be kind of who I was before. But that thing of having relationships with the people you work with and opening up, that vulnerability, that transparency, that wasn't on, 10 years ago, we were not talking about vulnerability and transparency in the workplace. I mean, I might have been one-on-one when I was coaching people, but that wasn't on the table. Psychological safety wasn't. These are, for those folks who are watching, and I see we've got a couple more folks here who are in the HR world. People weren't talking about psychological safety and transparency and vulnerability 10 years ago. I don't think we were talking about it 5 years ago. I think these are new, again, individually, yes, but as ways of changing the workforce and the way we work, no, definitely not. Yeah. So you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just thinking through, because I'm your question stuck in my mind in terms of, are we going at it through this lens of a white leader? So I was thinking, like, what if you are a diverse leader? What if you are a person of color? And I can even say for myself, I mean, I've been exhausted, right? Just literally just exhausted, right? So I think.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah, sure.
Can you tell me? I mean, if you don't want to answer, just obviously say shut up. In what way? Like, in what way are you exhausted?
I would say exhausted in the sense of, I think you said for you had this, enlightenment, around Trayvon Martin. And I've been like, man, I've been living with this for my whole life, for, working in different organizations, the only one. So I think for me, part of it is like, you're exhausted. I think it was part of the reason why I left, corporate in full transparency. It was like, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted of being the only one. I'm exhausted of feeling like my voice isn't really heard. I'm exhausted of feeling like I don't really feel included, or that there's a value to what it is that I have to say. And so I just think over time, and we use the term now, the microaggressions and all that, it just wears down, or I can speak for myself personally, just kind of wore down on me. And I was like, I've had enough. So there's, I think, that kind of an exhaustion. And then I just think there's, been a bit of a, frustration, like, when is this going to stop? Like, my dad started one of, like, the first now they're called ERGs, employee resource groups or business resource groups. But he started one of the first, it was the African American group that he started at Exelon ComEd, right?
Wow.
Probably 30 some odd years ago, probably. My dad's been retired for a while. And it's like, yes, there are some things that have dramatically changed. I mean, no one's going to, I couldn't sit here and say that there aren't things that have dramatically changed in the workplace. But then there's some things that have stayed the same. So then there's that kind of piece of a bit of frustration as well, too, right? So I think, you know, you and I are both coaches, and it's like, I'm able to hold both of those at the same time, right? That there's been progress, and there's also been some stagnation in some areas. So so that can lead to a little bit of, you know, frustration and exhaustion. But I'm hopeful too. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here doing that type of work.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That, you know, it sounds really hard. So thank you. So building on that, actually, we got a couple more comments. So if you're watching, just to reintroduce, that was Nancy Harris, and it still is Nancy Harris. She's not going anywhere. Nancy is the CEO and founder of Restart Consulting, and we're talking today about diversity, equity, and inclusion, a leader's journey. And if you're watching live, it's September 25th, Friday, around 12:30 Eastern U.S. time. Please share comments, questions. You know, if you're a professional or leader, you know, of color and have experience that you want to share, or things that you need or want to see different in your, you know, you would have liked or would like to see different in your world of work, I'd love to hear that. And also, if you know, if you've struggled or you feel like you have a win or a victory to share, I'd love to hear that. So please share in the comments section wherever you are, whether you're watching in LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, because then we can see most of the comments. And so I just want to, there's a couple more comments we got from Santosh Singh. Not knowing or being willfully ignorant isn't an option in a well-connected world.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, I would love to see that elevated, and people have to do the work. Like, every person has to do their own work.
Yeah. And one of the biggest frustrations I'm hearing from people say this too, it's like, gosh, you know, I'm in an organization. I had a conversation with someone that I mentored. We connected yesterday, and she said, you know, why am I, you know, always asked to do the work and figure things out? She's like, that's exhausting. And so she's right. So I would agree, you know, it's willfully ignorant. It isn't an option. It requires effort. It requires a willingness. It requires, I think we talk like a curiosity. And I also think it requires us to really kind of get real with where we are, right? Again, none of us are perfect on this journey.
So I want to pose a scenario, building on what you just said, and from Santosh's comment. So what I hear you saying, and I've heard from other friends and colleagues, you know, often, you know, a person of color, you know, the minority person, you know, again, whether it's, you know, race, gender, you know, LGBT status, whatever, they're often, okay, hey, can you lead that committee? How does one say, no, it's not, I'm not leading that committee. It's not my job to do it. How does someone say that?
Just like you did. And the person that I, you know, have now been friends with that I've mentored, I mean, she said, I just told the organization, she works at a large organization, won't say the name. If I said it, most people would know it. And she said, no, you know, no, I'm not going to do this. Right. And and again, I don't want to say it's easier said than done. I mean, right. It really is about being that clear, right? It is about saying no, like, I'm not going to take this on.
Right. And so, you know, and that I think can be hard for a lot of people, especially if they're not used to speaking up, or like you said, sometimes you felt you weren't heard. And so I would imagine if you think you're not being heard and then you're asked to do something, and you want to be heard, that could be really difficult to do.
I probably would have said, me personally, I probably would have been like, yes, yes, yes. I had to do my own individual work, right? I had to, work with a coach. I had to do a whole bunch of things to develop myself, to find, my own voice. And so, that was part of my journey. So now if somebody would say it, I could clearly say that. But you're right. It does take some courage. Well, we were talking about things that take some courage to be able to do that.
Yeah. So that's another one of those being, courageous, willing to speak up, or sometimes, and on the flip side, if you're, if you see someone doing that, why are you asking? Like, that also could have, if I was in that situation, it could have been my responsibility to say, no, you shouldn't ask her to do that. We should be doing that. So can you, use your voice in other ways to help elevate that?
Yeah.
We have another comment of Raman shared this, sincerity and being open to learning from your fellow minority leader, coworkers. We are all about helping those struggling with how to address this matter. Just ask. I have asked and learned a lot from that particular employee or team.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a difference between, and tell me if I'm right, or if you think I'm right. I think there's a difference between, asking, a minority, professional, hey, can you help me understand this? Or, your opinion really matters to me. Can I run this by you? Versus, okay, you're the only minority person, you run this committee. It's a very distinct, and I think this is what Raman is trying to say is, and that builds on what you were talking about the relationship. You should have relationships with all the people you work with. And so having that conversation then becomes, one of mutual kind of caring and support, which you would want from colleagues anyway.
Yeah.
Is that what you think?
Yeah. And I would add to that, Julie, this, and I keep going back to this kind of like foundational piece around trust, right? So if I trust where it is that you're coming from, yes, I feel comfortable with you asking me questions. If that trust isn't there, that's a whole different scenario, right? So I think that's also an important part of the mix as well, too, right? Yes. There are some places where I didn't have a strong trusting relationships with some of my colleagues, and if they ask me something, how I will perceive that or how I will respond will be different. Yeah,
I would imagine, of course.
Yeah.
Why would you risk?
Right, you're not going to risk it.
Yeah. If it's not so again, I think I want to stress that piece of this doesn't happen. This doesn't just happen around, heightened crisis. This is how one needs to work, with your peers, with your teams, with your direct reports.
I was on a call last night, and it was like I don't know if it's called the Black Opera Association, but they've put together a pledge specifically around diversity and asking all the different opera houses to sign on to this. Mm-hmm. So I think that was really interesting. But they had a panel of people that were on there, and I think it goes back to what we're talking about is that you mentioned there's a crisis, and you've probably seen this. I've seen this. There's crises that happen. Everybody now is, let's get diversity, equity, and inclusion, and let's do this, let's do that, like this flurry of activity. And, I agree with the person that was on the panel 100%. It's like, don't start with the flurry of activity. It's almost like you have to like slow down and go back and really start with that point of self-reflection if you're an individual. And then I also think organizationally, where are you at? I see organizations wanting to just go in and, they'll say, well, we need to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, what do you want to talk about? Well, we want to have training. Well, why do you want to have training? What's it on? What's the intent of that? What are you trying to accomplish? And, unfortunately, sometimes it's
a
check
checkbox.
the box to say that we have done this, right?
You got me excited when you did the checkbox. I'm like, yeah. So, from my world and your world, as consultants, I go to organizations. I mean, I sell executive coaching and training and leadership development initiatives. And the first thing I ask is like, well, before I even consider wanting to work with you, what are the results you want? I need to know what the results you want so I can tell you how we support you in getting those. Not, oh yeah, I have to do this. So it looks like I'm on message.
I had an organization that came to me last year and they wanted to do diversity work. The HR person came to me. And I always kind of ask these questions like, why, who's driving it? Is it you that wants it as the HR? I've spent 20 years in HR. I'm not knocking HR, but if HR is the only, the function that's driving it, what's your CEO saying? What are your CEO? What are they saying? And it was clearly coming from HR and it ended up, the person said, you know what, we're not going to do anything right now. Well, fast forward to 2020, now they want to do it. And I was like, well, what's different from 2019 to now?
Right.
And I think that's maybe a good question. That's a good question, a starting point to say, well, we know what's different, but then ask that again. What's really different? Are we responding to what's going on? Are we really intentional about what it is that we want to create in terms of an organization? So we could probably spend another hour with
Yeah, and I think we're going to have to spend another hour because we've still got some time, but we've raised a lot of interesting questions. So I want to pause, reintroduce you. That's Nancy Harris, my guest and colleague. She's the founder and CEO of Restart Consulting. Based in Chicago, but works all over the country and world, wherever. Now that we all can do remote work everywhere, we're available everywhere, right? And our topic today is diversity, equity, and inclusion, a leader's journey. We definitely love your comments and questions. What we were just talking about there was, checking the box and doing an organizational initiative versus what do you really want to accomplish? So I'm curious, I know, if we have anyone who's watching either live or in our recorded format, if we have any HR professionals and leaders, curious, how your organization currently or in the past has handled training and what were the results? I would love to hear from folks what were the results you wanted, as well as what was the catalyst for your organization of investing time, energy, and attention into diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. So would love to hear that. So anything you put in the comments, we will respond to. And we're gonna kind of keep moving forward. And so we talked about, we were looking at this leader's journey as what leaders need to think, do, and be differently. We actually spent most of our time so far today on how they need to be different. Which honestly, that seems foundational. You have to have those traits to in order to just kind of get to those next levels. And so we can maybe talk about them concurrently. What do people need to think differently? How do their thoughts need to change? And then what do they need to do differently on an individual level, team level, and organizational level? And I think we started touching on kind of what they need to do differently. Be building relationships consistently with everyone on their team, regardless of their, their kind of who they are, and kind of how they identify. So, and that enables then you to see each person as an individual, as opposed to a group and make generalities. So, what else? Or build on that. What else do you think?
Well, we've touched on some of the thinking differently as well too. It's that thinking sometimes that we fall into of I have to be, perfect. I have to say the right thing. What am I going to look like? And all of those are from the lens and the framework of you.
Yes.
And it's not asking the question in terms of the coach that my coach now will say, well, what's going to best serve you, and that, you know, what's going to best serve your team, right? And so when you're looking at it again from that standpoint, well, I might say the wrong thing, or, you know, it's, again, it's the you focus. It needs to be like, oh, I've got this team here that, what's going to serve them? What's going to best serve this individual on my team? What would best help them right now? And the focus, or taking the spotlight off of yourself.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great coaching question. I want to see if people have anyone else who's watching, if you have any other questions, comments, you know, what struck you about this conversation today, you know, regardless of kind of where you sit in an organization or in your role. Would love to hear any final thoughts as we begin to wrap up. You know, I think some of the big themes that are really important, and I want to hear, you know, kind of what you see as the big themes are. But what we've talked about is silence is never okay, and it should not be your default. And so if you're uncomfortable, and so where I would take that to the next level, if you're uncomfortable about whether it's having a conversation with, you know, someone who looks different than you, and, you know, they may be in pain or distress, or just experiencing the world differently than you, you know, being silent is not a good approach, and it's just not okay from a human level in the workplace. I mean, at home, if you want to ignore that, you know, that's who you are. That's fine.
That's your relationship.
Exactly. But at work, if you're in a leadership role, honestly, I would go as far to say, if you're just a colleague, you need to build some of these muscles. I'll be that bold. Okay. And then it's great to have a safe place to discuss. And, you know, it's interesting. And, you know, there's trends now, and organizations that are, you know, there's, you know, consulting firms and organizations that are giving, you know, non-minority people safe spaces to talk about this in a learning context. And so, you know, that's great if it starts getting people who have the implied power and the, you know, the systemic power able to talk about this stuff. That's great if that does, you know, if that starts moving the work forward. And then self-reflection, right? Those were the three themes, and there's more. So what else am I forgetting?
Well, I want to just connect on something that you said about systemic, and, you know, you used the word, and I think it's important to know, I mean, these are systems that are in place. I don't know if anybody listening, or Julie, if you've ever seen this show. Now I can't think of the name of it. Oh my gosh, it was about the advertising firm in the 1950s.
Oh, yeah. Mad Men.
Mad Men, right? And so I would watch that show, and I not that the storyline was that interesting, but it was like at just the workplace, right? And I was just like, you know what, the workplace, and I'll use gender as an example there. I mean, it was like it wasn't built, those systems and structures were not built thinking that there were going to be women working in them. I mean, if you watch that show, it was, the women were secretaries, as they, I believe, called them at the time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it was like, we are really talking about changing things from a systemic level in the organization. And again, it takes time, it takes courage that we're talking about, and you know, it takes intentionality as well too. So I just, when you said that, I wanted to bring that in, because I know we've been talking about it a lot from the individual level and what you can do as an individual leader, but also to know too, there's a systemic piece, and I always say like a change management piece to all of this, to kind of dismantling that, those systems that have not been, you know, places where people of color, women, LGBT LGBTQ, if you have able, all of that, that's not what the systems and structures were built on. So.
Right. And that's a really tricky, I mean, that maybe is our next conversation, because, it's funny. I come from, it's probably like 15 years ago when I kind of moved when I moved formally into the work-life balance space with kind of training and coaching and development. My approach to that was similar in that I see all these needs for systemic change when you look at us compared to pretty much every other kind of every other country that has kind of policies and structures that help caregivers and parents and families in distress around work. And I unfortunately still believe this around that issue is the workplace is never going to necessarily change to fully enable people to have work-life balance or work-life integration. So the individual needs to take care of that. Now, in the last couple of years, there's been huge shifts on that. Finally, still not systemic and policy driven. We still don't have, paid leave and blah, 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 and all these things. That's another conversation too. But, the pessimist in me is like, organizations are never going to do this hard work until, kind of their, I hate to use this analogy, but till guns to their head. And yet there feels like right now, the first time ever, there's more of a critical mass than there's ever been around the DE&I issues. So, like you said, hope, you can't but be hopeful, because if you're not, then you're kind of, not working towards it. So there's definitely lots more conversations we can have. So before I wrap up, I just said a lot. I'd love you to have kind of the final thoughts on this topic. Things you want, is there a message you want to kind of either to summarize or to kind of close the conversation now?
I didn't think through that question, so I'm just going to go with whatever comes to my mind, which is, dig deep, really ask yourself where you're at, be curious, and keep learning.
That's great. So thank you. I have nothing to add. It's the perfect wrap up of our conversation. I want to reintroduce you and let people know how to connect with you. So that was my colleague, Nancy Harris, founder and CEO of Restart Consulting, based in Chicago. What's the best way for people if they want to talk to you or use your services?
I am on LinkedIn, just my name. If you look me up, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, not super active, but it's at Restart Nancy on Twitter. But LinkedIn is my most, active platform. I'm also on Facebook too, which the name of my company, which is Restart Consulting, as well. But yeah, like I said, LinkedIn is it. And if anybody wants to check out the Intersection Podcast, it's the Intersection Podcast. It's on all platforms. And we talk about these very issues. It's the intersection of social justice, business, and education, all coming together, talking to leaders from all those different areas in terms of how we can transform and make the workplace more inclusive.
That's great. Well, thank you for that. So with that, and maybe there's some resources Nancy can send me a couple good resources, and I'll put them in the comment section on LinkedIn if people want to visit that. So
might be good for your book club if we've got some.
Yeah, there you go. That's one thing I do a huge amount of reading, but I'm always looking for new books. But so that's a nice segue. So coming up, our first book, Work Life Leader Book Group. I'm going to kind of explain the details in the next week. But our book, which the discussion probably won't be for at least a couple weeks, but if you're interested, this is the book, No Rules Rules: Netflix and the Culture of Reinvention by Reed Hastings and Erin Meyer. I'm reading it real time. And then other things coming up, Work Life Leader Live. One of our new topics that are going to be coming up soon is going to be called Bots, HR, and Coaching. I'm looking forward to that, and I'll tell more about that online. And if there's topics that you want us to be discussing, that you want me to find guests to talk about, any topics related to the intersection, not to the even the intersection, to kind of the world of work, professional effectiveness, leadership impact and effectiveness, work-life balance, work-life integration, the world of work, and kind of how we thrive in that. That's what we're about. So thank you all. Really appreciate you being here in Work Life Leader Live. Nancy, always good to talk with you. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.